Hello, everyone. Today I thought I'd do a podcast that's a little less heavy. Um, and just as a public service, I would like to talk to you about timeshares. I did another podcast earlier on about an industry that I thought should go away, and that was the payday, essentially the payday loan or short term loan industry, and talked about federal laws that could be passed, bringing back some old usury laws to basically put folks who uh, put the business that rips off poor folks out of business. This is another industry, the timeshare industry, that I think should go away because it's basically just a ripoff. And in almost 100% of cases. Now, I think most of you probably, if you're listening to my podcast, most of you probably know that timeshares are bad. There's a lot of like TV shows that you might have seen that make jokes about timeshares and what a ripoff they are. But I think a lot of people, although they sort of know that timeshares in the back of their mind, probably not a good thing, they don't know why they're not a good thing. Most people, if you just ask them, okay, why are timeshares bad, wouldn't be able to tell you. So I'm going to tell you why timeshares are bad and why you should never get involved in this game because it's just going to make you poorer um, and give you essentially no value for the money that you spend. Uh, it bugs me that in our capitalist society there's so much predatory activity, so many rich folks who use loopholes in the law or often loopholes that they paid lobbyists to get for them in order to rip off poor folks or people with less. And I really dislike this. Um, I find it gross and distasteful. So these are, there are these little sub industries within our capitalist structure that I really want to go away, and this is one of them. Okay, so let's talk about what a timeshare is, how much it costs typically, and why you've got to stay away. So, a timeshare is essentially a vacation home, but you're not buying, when you buy a timeshare, you're not buying the whole home. You're buying just a little slice of it, right? So, you're basically buying the right to spend maybe 1 week, maybe 2 weeks a year in this home. And the home, quote unquote, is usually part of a big condo, essentially like a condo complex or resort complex. And so when you buy your timeshare, timeshare literally means sharing time with other folks in that unit. When you buy, essentially an apartment or a condo in this complex, you're not buying the whole thing. You're buying essentially the right to use it for a week or two a year. And often the contracts and timeshares do specify the times that you can use it. This week, that week, December, whatever, October, whatever. Um, but in any case, you're co-owning that unit essentially with maybe 50 other people who've been sold different weeks to spend in that unit. So you're essentially just buying the opportunity to take a 1 or 2 week vacation each year, just once per year, in this unit. But you're paying a lot of money for that privilege. So typically, timeshare, just I looked up the average cost around the United States, and of course, how much it actually costs depends on where it is, how popular the destination is, because it's a vacation home. So how popular destination is, what time of year you get to be there. I mean, do you get to go during the season that people really want to take vacations, or do you have some weird time where people don't want to take vacations there? So the price varies on all these factors, but on average, timeshares cost $24,000. So for 24,000, you get the right to spend 1 week a year, essentially in perpetuity, forever and ever, at this place. 1 week. That's what you get. And then, of course, at the end of the week, you have to vacate because somebody else who owns the next week is going to come in and take over the place. So functionally, it's like staying in a hotel for a week at a particular destination, 1 week a year. And you should know that in general, timeshares are a ripoff only because, if you consider nothing else, because the cost you pay for the timeshare is a lot more than the cost you pay for staying in a hotel in the same location for a week a year. So now, of course, how much it actually costs you depends on how many years you actually go. But there are several advantages to staying in hotels. And we'll talk about a lot of them. But one of the advantages of staying in a hotel is, you can choose the location. So if you don't feel like going to exactly the same place for vacation every year, you can choose to go somewhere else if you just choose to stay in a hotel for a week a year. And hotels often offer a lot of amenities that timeshares don't. And on a cost per night basis, timeshares tend to be a ripoff unless you really use the timeshare every year for 20 or 30 years. You're financially going to spend more money on the timeshare per night than you would on a hotel, even a nice hotel. I'm talking about, like a higher end hotel. Would still be cheaper for you and give you a lot more flexibility than doing a timeshare. So for most people, it's a straight up ripoff anyway, because you'd be better off just staying in a hotel for a week a year. But let's talk about some of the legal details of timeshares that make them particularly onerous. A lot of people get sucked into timeshares only because the companies that sell timeshares, they offer free perks if you go and listen to their spiel. That is their pitch for the timeshare. And so some people try to take advantage of these companies by, like, if the company's offering an overnight vacation stay at some nice location, then you take that thinking, well, all I have to do is listen to their pitch, and I'm just going to ignore it, and then I get free vacation. Or if they're offering me tickets to shows or whatever, I get free tickets, and all I have to do is listen to them talk for a little bit. But you're wrong about that. For anybody who's ever been on a timeshare junket like this, if you try to take advantage of that, they know you're trying to take advantage of them, and what they do is they make your life hell. So for the entire time you're there, if you take a little mini vacation, they'll be hounding you. They'll be on you. They'll be talking to you. They'll be trying to sell you. They'll be putting papers in front of you. And they will do it for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. You won't have any time to have any fun. They're going to do it all day, and they're going to do it at night, and they're going to keep doing it the next morning if they have to. And but they're actually like used car salespeople. They're trained to make the sale. So they do, try to make it attractive. They'll give you an initial cost, which will probably be on the high end. This is just like a used car or selling cars. And then when you say no to that, that's too much money, then they'll keep you there for a while, and they'll bring in somebody else a little later, a manager who will come in and say, okay, yeah, we'll drop the price for you to make it more reasonable and in your budget. And they'll just keep doing that until you give in. They'll eventually, like a detective grilling you for hours at the precinct about your crimes, they'll break you eventually, because that's what they're trained to do. So accepting those timeshare freebies, assuming that you'll be able to get out of this unscathed and just get your free stuff, almost never happens. these companies have a surprisingly high sales rate, um, even though most people go into them not expecting to actually buy anything. So, just know that going in. But let's talk about legalities of why timeshares are icky. First of all, when people buy real estate, there's usually an assumption that it will generally go up in value because most real estate does go up in value. But timeshares aren't like that. They don't go up in value. They go down in value almost 100% of the time. And there's several reasons for that. People are just buying a sliver of a vacation home here. And so they want the place to be nice and new and shiny because it's a vacation home. And they're going there just for fun. They're not going to live in it, right? It's just for fun. So everybody, when they buy timeshares, they want something new and shiny. They want the new place, the hopefully brand new place, but at least nearly new and in great shape. But of course, like any other, bit of real estate, like any building, timeshares over time get rattier. They get wear and tear. They don't look as nice. Other things pop up that are newer and shinier. And so because of that, and because the owners are just using this property as, for fun, not for real living, timeshares almost always go down in value over time. Only because the property doesn't look as nice and isn't as new, doesn't have as many amenities as the newer stuff coming up. And so, when you buy a normal home, normal homes do tend to appreciate over time. When you buy a timeshare, it's going to go down in value, and actually usually pretty quickly. Within a few years, the timeshare may be worth just a tiny fraction of what you paid for it. So if you bought a timeshare, for example, for $24,000 and held on to it for 3 or 4 years, by the end of 3 or 4 years, because there's been a fair amount of wear and tear on the property and maybe on your unit as well. Remember, your unit isn't just yours. You're sharing it with 50 other people. And all of them, when they come in, are creating some wear and tear on the unit. So after a few years, the unit's not going to look so nice. And so your $24,000 timeshare, when you started 3 or 4 years later, might be worth, if you're lucky, a few $1,000s. So you've lost almost all your money within a few years. Sort of like owning a car, except not even as good. Cars actually retain their value better than timeshares do. So, if you then want to sell the timeshare after a few years, forget it. Yes, you can theoretically, but you're not going to get anywhere close to what you paid for it. So you're going to have lost a lot of money. Also, timeshares come with annual fees. There's maintenance fees, and everybody who owns or co-owns a timeshare has to pay these fees. Maintenance fees, property taxes, regular assessments and repairs, and property upgrades. And those fees amount to generally over $1,000 a year, even for timeshares that aren't that nice. So typical for annual fees on timeshares is $800 to $1,200 a year. And you have to pay those fees forever, for as long as you own the timeshare. And, so it's an ongoing cost burden. In addition to the fact that you're losing all your value from your initial investment, whatever you paid for the timeshare, you have these ongoing fees that are costing you money every year. So the tune of roughly $100 a month for the rest of your life. Timeshares are not like normal real estate investments also because you can't sell them until you're completely paid off on the timeshare. So if you bought a timeshare for $24,000 and didn't pay all cash for it, let's say you took out a loan, until that loan is completely paid off, you cannot sell that timeshare. Not at all, not anywhere. It's not legal. You also have to be current on all your annual maintenance fees. So if you owe $1 in either maintenance fee or original loan on that timeshare, you cannot sell it. That's different, of course, than regular real estate. Most people do sell their homes while they still owe money on the mortgage. They just use the part of the sale price to pay off the mortgage. Can't do that in a timeshare. Can't sell it if you owe anything. And of course, even if you do sell it, you ain't going to get much for it if you've been there for more than, say, a year or two. Also, it's even worse than it sounds because most timeshares have what's called a perpetuity clause, which is illegal in most other instances. And that means that when you die, your heirs automatically get your timeshare, even if you didn't specify the timeshare in your will. Your heirs get it. It passes automatically. That's the perpetuity clause. And that means that your heirs are now responsible for paying the annual maintenance fees on that timeshare. And by the time you die, probably the timeshare will have no resale value at all. So your heirs will not be able to sell it. And for the rest of their lives and their children's lives and their children's lives, because perpetuity means generation after generation, everybody's going to be assessed the annual maintenance fees that they're going to have to pay. So if you're thinking that your timeshare will be a blessing to your heirs, it's actually going to be a financial burden to your heirs that will go on forever. And once the timeshare loses its value, it's unsellable. So your heirs can't get rid of it by selling it. Pretty much by that time, the only way you can get rid of a timeshare is if you can find something, if you can just donate it to a charity and find a charity that's willing to take it. But there are so many people trying to unload timeshare contracts that finding charities actually willing to take timeshares off somebody's hands, even for no money, very hard. So this becomes a permanent debt burden for you, permanent debt burden for your heirs, which is horrific. I mean, that should not be legal. And in fact, it isn't legal in every other instance. Perpetuity clauses were made illegal in the United States a long time ago, except for timeshares. And again, as I mentioned early on, timeshares are a ripoff in the sense of, let's suppose you use it the way it was intended to be used. So you paid your money, you got your week a year, and you use your week a year. So let's suppose you bought a timeshare in Vegas or Orlando, Florida, because you like Disney World. So let's say Orlando, Florida. You got a timeshare for $24,000 in Orlando, Florida. And the building was nice when you bought into it because it was probably new or nearly new. And so every week, every year, you get 7 days in your timeshare. But you spent $24,000 for that privilege. Plus you spend, let's say, $1,200 a year in maintenance fees. Okay, so let's suppose, I'm just going to do some math for you. Let's suppose you keep that timeshare for 10 years. And you pay off the original loan. Let's suppose you actually put cash down on the original. You didn't even take out a loan. You just put cash down on the timeshare. So you spent $24,000 for the timeshare. And then $1,200 a year in maintenance fees. So you've had it 10 years. That's another $12,000. So you've spent, in 10 years, you spent $36,000 on your timeshare. I'm using my calculator here. $36,000 on your timeshare. Now, in 10 years, you got to use it for 10 weeks because you get 1 week a year. And each week is 7 days. So we're going to do this on a daily basis. So 10 weeks, you spent $36,000 to live in this place for 10 weeks, which is 70 days. That's 10 times 7, 7 days a week. So let's calculate the per day expense. So 36,000 divided by 70. So if you use the timeshare for 10 years and you do it 1 week a year, you take your 1 week a year every year like you were promised. I mean, they have to let you do that. That's the agreement. So that meant you spent $514 a night on that place. Your total cost was $36,000. You got 70 nights for that money. So that's $514 a night over 10 years. You were restricted, of course, to just going to your unit, your location, 1 week a year. Now, for $514 a night, you can get a pretty darn nice hotel, particularly in, even in places like that are popular tourist destinations, like say Vegas or Orlando, Florida for Disney World. For example, in Orlando, Florida, you can stay in some nice Disney World adjacent hotels for about $300 a night, but you were spending $514 a night on your timeshare. In Vegas, you can stay at some really nice hotels for in the $400 to $450 a night range. So even if you keep the timeshare for 10 years and use it every year, the per night cost on your timeshare is way higher. Well, it's significantly higher than the per night cost would have been just renting a nice hotel room in that same location. So the only way this becomes not a ripoff, just on a per night basis, cost basis, is if you use that timeshare like every year for 20 years. Then you're in the range of maybe you're spending a little less than you would on a nice hotel for that location. But bottom line is you'd be in much better financial shape just staying in hotels. Plus, that would give you the hotels, it would give you the flexibility of you could stay in different places, you could take vacations in different cities. If you got bored with your one location, you didn't really want to go that same place every year. And you wouldn't be, if you're doing hotels, you wouldn't, of course, have a debt burden that you're passing on to your heirs that they're going to have a very hard time getting rid of. So for all of these reasons, you got to stay away from timeshares. They are a bad, bad deal financially. They're going to make you poorer if you get into them. And they're not going to give you the value that you assume. When you first look at a brand new timeshare, whenever they're selling you a timeshare, they take you to usually the brand new buildings, the ones that are, have been put up in less than a year, so they still look nice, and they have some amenities, and everything is, sparkly looking. But just remember that it's not going to stay that way. And as soon as it stops being that way, which is usually within a few years, the timeshare value is essentially zero. And you still have annual maintenance fees that you've got to pay forever, and then your heirs have to pay forever. So, bad deal. Don't do it. Stay away. Don't fall for the, we'll give you a free overnight stay in a nice location if you come listen to our timeshare thing. It ain't gonna be worth it. Even if you somehow manage not to buy the timeshare, it's still not worth it, because the hell they're going to put you through trying to get you to sign that contract is going to ruin your vacation time anyway. So, yeah, just don't do it. Should be illegal. Honestly, this should be illegal. It isn't illegal. It's still legal to do. So, they're on the right side of the law here. But you just need, and because of that, you're not protected by the law. They're protected. The owners of the timeshares are protected. That is, the owners of the timeshare companies are protected. But the owners of the timeshares are not protected. You are not protected by the law. The law is against you here. And so you just need to stay away. All right? Hope I've made my case. And I will see you next time.